Ladies and gentlemen, transmitting direct from Lion's Den Studios in Los Angeles, California, Crewest Studios and Danube Productions bring you The Conduit, bringing together motivated artists to share their experience and to pull back the curtain for a first-hand look at a life in the arts. Today our guest is songwriter, actor, top session singer, and musical chameleon, Cy Smith. So adjust your antenna, relax, and tune in. The program is about to begin. All right, welcome everyone to episode 2 of The Conduit, a podcast where I sit down and talk to amazing, courageous people about making a living in the arts. Today my guest is singer, songwriter, musician, and actor, Cy Smith, who has, amongst many other things, provided backing vocals to legendary artists from Whitney Houston, Sheila E., Michelle Ndegeocello, Chaka Khan, Usher, and Macy Gray, just to name a few. Under her own name, Cy has released 5 critically acclaimed albums with contributions from producers like James Poyser of The Roots, Ali Shaheed Muhammad of A Tribe Called Quest, and Nikolai of The Foreign Exchange. In recent years, Cy has duetted with Grammy-winning trumpeter Chris Botti, with her interpretation of the Burt Bacharach classic The Look of Love being an audience favorite. Cy also gratefully contributed a killer vocal performance of Helene Smith's You Got to Be a Man for a single by my group Night Owls. But that's not all. Cy also moonlights as an actor, having played roles in TV shows like Ally McBeal, How I Met Your Mother, and American Dad. And her voice can be heard as the character of Aisha on the popular video game franchise Saints Row. If it were up to me, Cy's next gig would be with Herbie Hancock, because like Herbie, Cy is a true chameleon. So without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with the lovely and talented Cy Smith. Well, Cy, welcome to The Conduits. I'm so grateful to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, you're so welcome. So I just want to get started. Like I was just telling you, there's so much stuff to cover here because you've been in so many amazing situations. And I think our listeners will, it's my years as a writer, catching up with me. Our listeners will really benefit from all the situations you've been in and been a part of. So cool. It's really, The Conduit's really an attempt to give listeners insight into, the life of an artist and how you can make a life as an artist. So I want to start kind of with the journey all of us start with is the journey at home. So you were born in New York and then came up in Washington, D.C. Right. And I just want to know, kind of take us through what growing up in D.C. was like and how it shaped you, what family life was like, what records were played in your house, all that kind of stuff.
All that stuff. So, my mother and her 4 sisters, 3 of her sisters all lived in New York. And so that's where I was born. And then my mother decided to move down to D.C. so that she could attend Howard University for her master's.
Oh, your mom went there as well.
Yeah.
Oh, how beautiful.
And so, so we moved to D.C. fairly early in my life. But I traveled around a lot very early on. It was very much a village raising me, but our village was between 3 or 4 states. So I spent a lot of time in New York and New Jersey and a lot of time in Tennessee, where my mother is originally from. And then, of course, DC being our home now, so I just wanted to put that out there to make people sort of understand that, like, traveling was always a part of my life,
Wow, yeah.
So in DC, of course, Dan, go-go is a big thing.
Yeah.
And anybody, especially Black kids who have any Black kids who have any sort of inkling, towards music, we're going to end up playing go-go at some point, probably,
Right.
So flashback to when I was about 6 years old. I was always playing a piano because there was a piano in my grandparents' house in Tennessee.
Okay.
So my mother
Where
bought
in
me
Tennessee was this? Where was that?
So my family is from a place called Promised Land, Tennessee. This is about 45 miles from Nashville.
Okay.
And this is the land that we have been on since in like slavery.
Yeah.
Like we've been in that area, and then after the Civil War, my forefathers went back to Promised Land with their money that they earned from fighting with the Union, and they bought a whole bunch of land, and so that's where my
Oh,
family
good.
still lives. You know.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha.
So so yeah, my mom saw that I had a thing about keyboards, so she bought me a little keyboard. It was by a
Yeah.
company called Bone Tempe, a Bone Tempe
Bon
organ.
Tempe. Okay.
and,
Yeah. I think
and
I've seen that before.
really,
Yeah. Bon Tempe. That sounds familiar.
yeah,
There's so many little home organs from back
right,
then.
right. Those
Yeah.
little organs that had the the chords on the left, the B flat, F, so
Right.
yeah, in major and minor.
Okay.
So she bought me one of those, and I begged for piano lessons, and she put me in this sort of weird public school kind of piano lesson. I didn't really understand, but it was like a group piano lesson. There was about 10 of us, and we
Okay.
met once a week. And
Yeah.
I was too young to really articulate what I wanted, and I didn't know how to say private instruction, but that's what I
Yeah.
wanted. I was like, "Mom, I want it where it's just me and the teacher. Can you get me that?"
Sure. Well, you were craving a lot of, a lot of knowledge, which is hard in a group situation.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So eventually, maybe by the time I turned 8, she found a piano teacher for me. So that was my first formal instruction in
Okay.
music.
Yeah.
Um, Prior to that, everything I was playing was by ear, and my mom thought I was a genius because I could play the Daz Band Whip It, you know.
Oh, nice, nice. Yeah.
um, and we went to church. We went to First Baptist Church on Minnesota Avenue in Southeast, and
Yeah.
of course, music is a big thing in church, and I was always paying attention to, what music came out of the different choirs in my church and the different,
Yeah.
musicians, and I ended up playing piano for the Sunday school choir, and
Oh,
that
yeah.
kind of thing. Probably by the time I was 13 or so, um, and traveling in the summertime back and forth between, New York, where I would spend half of the summer, and Tennessee, where I might spend the other half. Um, Hip hop was of course becoming a thing, but
Yeah.
because I was traveling, I got to hear regional stuff, you know,
Right.
because it was very regional back then. After the Sugar Hill Gang and Curtis Blow and stuff, you started having, stuff that you would only hear in Tennessee, and then stuff,
Absolutely. Yeah.
stuff that I would only hear in New York. And of course, DC had its own, go-go was kind of its own thing.
What were
So
the things? Do you remember any specifics? What was stuff you were listening to that caught your ear back then?
like, I remember in Tennessee, there was a song called Space Cowboy. Like,
Okay.
he's different. He's number one. He's a space cowboy with a laser gun.
Oh,
And
that's awesome.
yeah, and it was like nobody in DC had ever heard that, to my knowledge. Like
Right.
that was only something I would hear in Tennessee.
Right.
And in
Hip
New
hop was
York,
so regional back
it
when it
was
started.
so
Like nobody
regional.
heard the other stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. It was so
Yeah.
regional. And that was kind of a beautiful thing, because, you know, people got to kind of hold on to their own thing. Like this was ours, we did
Sure.
this.
Sure.
Um, and then of course in New York, you might hear, like Run DMC a year before it came out anywhere else.
Right.
Um, and things that would get played on the radio in New York that never really made it to radio, outside of New York.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was sort of my sort of beginning, and around the house, what was being played. My mom isn't a musician, but she always made sure that I was listening to, like, she always made sure that I was just immersed in culture. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
Yeah.
there wasn't only music playing in the house. My mom made sure we went to plays. My mom made sure I
Oh,
went to the
nice.
museums. The
Yeah.
DC has a beautiful museum scene.
Yeah.
So she made sure that I was, in museums. She always made sure I had books by authors and poets like Nikki Giovanni and Sonia Sanchez. And so I was
Okay.
reading that kind of stuff very early, and really fell in love with words before, probably most kids do. Like reading was
Right.
something I love to do. And
Same.
and
Yeah. Same.
yeah, and writing became something I really learned love to do.
Yeah.
So and around the house she played everything from Nina Simone to Stevie Wonder and Aretha and all of those things too. But she also played things like The Last Poets,
Oh, yeah,
and
really? Nice.
yeah, and
Yeah,
she'd sit with me and read the lyrics to me because of course
yeah.
that stuff is kind of
They
there's
were
lots of
saying all kinds of
they're saying
beautiful
all
stuff
kinds of
back
stuff,
then.
but she
Yeah,
wanted to make
groundbreaking.
sure, yeah, she wanted to make sure that I understood it within the context that it was being
Right,
said, you know.
right.
Um, so so that was my grounding. Now my father,
Incredible.
I can't leave him out. He didn't live with us, but he always spent a lot of time with me. I'm also his namesake. Cy Smith is my dad's name.
Oh, got you.
And yeah, and my dad is from Queens originally, and he used to sing on the street corner in doo-wop groups.
Oh,
So,
wow. Okay.
yeah, so doo-wop was his thing, and he used to whenever
Yeah,
I was hanging out with him, it was
yeah,
always about Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, and
yeah.
it was all these doo-wop groups like he would play for me all the time, and I really grew to fall in love with that stuff too. You
Same
know.
here. I love it too. Yeah,
So that's where I really got my ear for harmony and that kind of thing, um,
yeah.
was my dad.
Right,
Um, by the time I got to third grade, I think I knew that I could sing, but I was so shy. I was painfully shy,
right. Yeah, yeah,
and so I auditioned for a choir in the third grade at my school,
yeah.
and and the it was a new teacher. She was unfamiliar to me, so that was one sort of point against me because I didn't know who she was. And then she asked me to do something that I was completely unfamiliar with,
Okay.
and that was to sing the solfege scale, and I
Oh,
didn't know what
yeah,
she was talking about.
yeah.
And she said, yeah, and she said, like The Sound of Music, do re mi fa sol la ti do, and I didn't know what The Sound of Music was. That was one thing that we didn't see in the
Yeah,
house.
yeah.
My thing was if she had
They
said
talk about cultural bias.
that right there, that
Yeah,
right there. So
yeah.
if she had named something from The Wiz, I would have been able to do it. But
Right.
but I didn't know what The Sound of Music was, and so I clammed up and
Yeah.
I didn't make it into the choir, and I was so angry at myself, and I was so angry
Their
that
loss.
well, it was okay though because what happened was I've made a sort of personal vow to myself to never show up anywhere unprepared.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And it took me 2 years and changing a school before before I would audition for a choir again.
Right.
But when I did it the next time I was ready, you know.
You were ready. Yeah.
And that next choir that I auditioned for was the Prince George's County Honors Choir, and this was at the
Ah,
direction of my music teacher in the new school, who said, "Sai, you have a thing, like you have a very good ear. I think you should audition for the honors course." And I didn't know what that was, but she
yeah.
told me, they only pick about 2 or 3 students per school, and you know
Wow.
the culmination concert is at the Kennedy Center. Have you ever been there? And I was like, "What?"
Dang.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it sounded exclusive and it sounded like something I wanted to be a part of. So
Yeah.
I auditioned for that. I got in, and that was the beginning of my journey as a vocalist in the choir circuit, you know.
Right. Right.
And that really shaped me in more ways than I can describe. But
Yeah.
I did Prince George's County Honors Course from 5th or 6th grade all the way to high school, because
Oh,
there's
wow. Yeah.
elementary, yeah, there's middle, and then there's high school. And every
Yeah.
year we sang at the Kennedy Center, as our final concert. Right.
Wow. That's incredible.
It's incredible. It's an incredible way to sort of come up.
Yeah,
And
boy.
from county chorus, then your teachers will encourage you to try out for all state, you know.
Yeah.
So I tried out for all state of Maryland, got
Yeah.
into that in high school, and then once you do all state, you can try out for all regional.
Okay.
And so I did all Eastern,
Yeah.
which I think ran from Maryland all the way up to Maine, maybe.
Okay.
That was the Eastern region.
Yeah.
Um, and then once you do like a regional thing like that, you just start getting invitations from different national courses. So At
Yeah.
16, I was invited to sing with the US National Chorus, and that was my first time going to Europe.
Uh-huh.
That's when I realized that music could literally take me around the world,
Yeah.
you know?
Sure, sure.
So that was my journey,
That's a
as a
beautiful day, isn't it?
as a
Realizing
kid.
that you're in some
Yeah.
place and you're like, music got me here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, right. But all of that wouldn't have happened if I had let that 3rd grade incident stop me from trying again, you know?
Right, which is tough for us shy kids. I mean, I was super shy in grade school as well, and
Yeah.
to kind of rise above that and realize, okay, but I want to do this, and I know I have a gift. And you obviously had like you said, a village around you to
Mhm.
support you and let you know, you can do this.
Right.
You had your background in piano, you knew your harmony, you grew up listening to doo-wop, so you were
Right.
hearing all those harmonies.
Right.
So
It
how did when you tried out for choir, what were the biggest realizations you had in how choral singing was different from doo-wop and chordal harmony you learned on piano? Like what were the biggest obstacles you faced?
um, I mean, the biggest obstacles might have been, just sometimes other kids didn't really hear as well, maybe, and
Yeah,
so sometimes just having to make sure that I didn't you're only as good as the least as the as the worst person in the section. You know
sure,
what I mean?
sure.
So,
Yeah.
it
A
does your
band with a
section
crappy drummer doesn't sound
right,
good.
right.
Yeah.
And it does your section no good for you to just be like, making sure that you're seen, So I
Yeah.
think my biggest obstacle was always just sort of making sure that I played well in the sandbox with everybody else. You know what I
Sure,
mean?
sure. It's a team
And
sport.
it's a team sport.
Yeah.
But it was really cool in that I learned to I learned a lot of patience in that regard,
Yeah.
and sort of how to be a section leader, you know, from that
Yeah.
experience. And I ended up, usually being the section leader,
Yeah.
probably from I can't even tell you, probably from elementary school on. I was always a section
Yeah.
leader.
Yeah.
Um,
And did
so
that entail helping people? Like if they didn't hear something, helping
absolutely.
them? Yeah, yeah,
Helping
I would think.
people, helping people hear, helping people see, like sight read and learn how to read. Because a lot of times, everybody didn't necessarily read.
Yeah.
So just
And you'd already gotten your reading together from learning piano?
right,
Yeah.
right. So,
Okay.
just and making sure that the other my fellow singers didn't get impatient with themselves, because
Right.
sometimes kids would just be like, just
Sure,
making sure
sure.
that they understood, like, no, this is hard for all of us.
Right,
You got
right,
this.
right,
Let's
right.
do it,
Yeah,
you
you
know?
got this. You got the
Yeah,
voice clearly.
right,
We just have to kind of make it work in this situation.
right, right.
Okay. Wow,
Yeah.
yeah. Amazing. What a journey. I was just watching, the Queen's Gambit again, and
Mm,
the choral singing thing sounds similar in that you're just kind of rising in the ranks slowly but surely, playing different
right,
things, going to different contests. It just builds and builds and
right,
builds. Oh
right.
man. Well,
Yeah.
so man, the Kennedy Center, that's not a bad series of first gigs, I
It's
guess.
it's really not, and I remember I remember my mom taking me there after I made it into county chorus the first time. She took
Yeah.
me to the Kennedy Center so I could see it, and we went into the concert hall. It's a bunch of different halls
Yeah.
within the Kennedy Center. So, but we played the concert hall, which is the main hall. And
Yeah.
she took me in there to see it, and I couldn't believe it. Like I'd never seen a pipe organ that big, and
Right.
it was just amazing. And now, even to this day, Dan, whenever I play at the Kennedy Center,
Yeah.
I become a sixth grader all over again. Like it's
Sure,
it's a
sure.
it's a really beautiful, magical place for me.
Yeah. Well, when you
Yeah.
clearly love doing something as much as you do, and we all do, that's why we do this
Right.
because we love it. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, you grow up seeing people and hearing people at these places, and it's a magical scenario. It's a
Yeah.
magical thing to be a part of.
Yeah. And even with all of that singing and stuff that I was doing in the choral circuit, And then sometimes I did, like I would do chamber choir in high school and women's choir, which were, smaller things. And then, we would break off into smaller sections and do um, solo and ensemble sort of competitions, like regional sort of competition. And and
Yeah.
and then I would, I competed a couple of times as a soloist, but classical vocal, right? I didn't really start singing contemporary music
Yeah.
until I finished high school, and that's when my mom let me join a go-go band because that was the agreement. You can't join a band until you finish high school, you know?
Gotcha.
So
Yeah.
when I joined the band, then I was playing keys and singing backup in that band. It was called Royalty Queens. That was the name of our
Oh,
band.
royalty
And
queens. I love it.
yeah, Royalty Queens. And I sang backup and played keys and sort of had to uh I had to sort of approach music differently than I had been because, of course, playing keys and stuff, we didn't have charts. I just had to figure out whatever I was playing, and usually I was
Right.
playing the horn parts or string lines and that kind of thing. Um,
Sure.
so I had to regroup and sort of get back into, learning by ear again, which was
It's a different
fine.
discipline,
A
right?
different discipline,
The
right?
band discipline versus the reading charts discipline.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And go-go bands have a front line, like a
Hmm.
lead talker and a lead singer, whatever. And so our frontline girls, to me, they were just the most amazing singers, or
Yeah.
singers slash rappers, and I just loved what they did as far as knowing how to relate with the audience and bringing
Yeah.
bringing everybody in and
Engaging.
engaging.
Yeah.
And I thought about it, you know, in retrospect, I remember my mom taking me to a play called Your Arms Too Short to Box with God at the Warner Theater,
Wow.
and Patti LaBelle was the lead in this
Oh.
musical,
Uh-oh.
and we had front row seats, and, I was probably, I don't know, 8 years old, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the play, like a curtain call sort of, number. Patti LaBelle comes out, she's singing and doing Patti, and she kind
Yeah.
of jumps off the stage and she comes right to me and takes my hand and stands me up, and
No way.
I mean, and I was just like, I was I was blown away, and that's probably the moment when I realized this is what I want to do, you know
Yeah.
And and it was a weird sort of thing for me because I knew I was never gonna sound like Patti LaBelle, right? I just knew what kind of
Nobody will except for Patty.
right, right. I just knew what kind of instrument I had, or
Yeah.
at least, to me, and this was I was a very young girl, but, fast forward to the go-go band and seeing that same sort of, engagement sort
Yeah.
of reignited that feeling, like
Yeah.
this is what I want to do. But I was still very painfully shy. Okay.
Sure. Sure.
And so it was still very much like pulling teeth to get me to
Mm.
sing lead on anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it was like pulling teeth to get me to sing lead in church, anywhere.
Yeah.
So and nobody would believe this now, but it was really, really hard for me to break out of that shell.
Yeah.
Um, I'm sort of
I think a
jumping
lot of
ahead.
artists, I mean, we've all met so many artists through the years, and 90% of people I know that do this for a living were
Mhm.
shy kids, a
Yeah,
lot of them. And also, just sensitive kids. I mean, you
right.
don't channel this beautiful, I'm not speaking of myself here, but I'm saying in general,
Mhm.
you channel, the reason you can express yourself with music so well is because you're a sensitive person and you take things, you're kind of always an observer and
Yes.
watching things. And for a lot of us, it takes a lot of time and practice to break out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was weird was I wasn't a shy kid in any
Okay.
other way. Like,
Ah,
it was only about singing, but I could
okay.
stand up in the class and tell jokes I could,
Oh, yeah.
you know, it was sort of my job in the family to imitate other people in the family, I wasn't shy in any other regard except for singing. And I think it was
Right.
because singing is such an intimate
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
So that to me was, I think, it's like taking off your clothes and being naked in front of everybody. That's what it felt,
Absolutely.
that's what it felt like to me.
Well, that's what
Yeah.
it I mean, I sing too, not at the level you are, but I love singing. I've always loved singing,
Yeah.
and I've stood in front of 60,000 people playing guitar before. But singing in front of
Mhm.
people is all I
Mhm.
mean, you're right. You're exposing yourself.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
something I'm slowly learning over the last 10 years that I can, you kind of just have to be like, use it or lose it. You've got this thing, you got to
Right.
either do it or you're not going to do it.
Right.
But you can't be worried about it. You got to just
Right.
do it.
You
Yeah,
gotta just do it. Yeah, you just gotta trust your instrument. You gotta practice and all that stuff. You have to practice. You gotta put the hours
absolutely.
in. But then you
Yeah,
have to trust what trust the work that you've put into it, you know?
right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's such an interesting, difference in coming up singing in choral groups, like you said, where you're a part of a
Mhm.
thing and you're playing the Kennedy Center. And although
Mhm.
there is an audio exchange with the audience, they're applauding after you're done, I would assume.
Mhm. Mhm.
But that exchange you have when you're in the front line at a club with a go-go group or with a
Right.
band in a club, and you're reaching out and bringing a young girl up with you or connecting with the audience, it's
Right.
two totally separate kind of
Right.
experiences.
Right. Totally. Totally.
Yeah,
And I don't
yeah,
know about you, Dan, but like I find that singing in a, armory full of, 15,000, 20,000 people is
yeah.
way easier than at the,
A club.
Temple Bar. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. It
You
is those
know?
small club, but which is why, you see big groups like the Stones who still, they can sell out arenas, but
Right.
they still on all their tours go and do club dates too. Because
Ah,
that's the thing that,
because that's the
it's
thing.
kind of like make it or break it. And
Yep.
like, can you still relate with a crowd close up? Because that's the most
Right.
important thing,
That's the most important thing. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's where you can really, you know, tell the men from the boys, so to speak.
Right. Well, it's that connection, and if
Mhm.
music is all about connection, and if you can't
Mhm.
connect, you can't connect.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was reading, obviously, to go back to your mom and talking about her going to Howard University, and then
Mhm.
you ended up there
I did.
um, getting a bachelor of science in psychology, and talk
Yeah.
about something that would I would assume come in real handy in the music business, dealing with all these personalities. Talk about going to Howard and your degree and how that helped in how it's helped in the music business.
You know, um, well, first of all, going to Howard was the best decision I could have ever made in my life.
Yeah,
It was an incredible college experience.
yeah,
I wouldn't trade it for the world.
yeah,
I still am in touch with so many of my friends that I went to school with, and a couple of
yeah.
my professors, for that matter.
Right.
It's that kind of experience, where my mother told me, if you go to a black college, the professors are going to care about you. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, mom, you just they'll care wherever you go. But and she'll say, if you go to a black college, she would tell me what experiences would be like, and I didn't really believe her because I was a teenager, but
Yeah.
but she was right. And Howard was all of those things. I went
Yeah.
into psychology because my mother was a clinical psychotherapist or a clinical social worker who had a
Oh, okay.
practice, as a private practice, among the other things that she did in hospitals, in
Yeah.
hospital administration. Uh, so my mom and I would sit around and watch, videos and of like sort of psychological vignettes, and where we would diagnose a patient. Like this is what we did for fun. So yeah,
Right. That's great.
psychology is what I went into, thinking
Yeah.
that that was, going to be my road. Because it wasn't really until my junior year that I committed. that I knew I was ready to make a commitment towards trying to have a career in music.
Mm.
Um, I was in an a cappella group at Howard called In Time, and
Yeah.
yeah, and we had a lot of fun, but In Time was really where I sort of started to come out of my shell as a singer, because they
Yeah.
really pushed me to sing leads on a lot of things, and they also encouraged my songwriting too. Um,
Okay. How
and,
In Time was all Howard students as well?
yeah, we were.
Okay.
It
Gotcha.
was Gino Young, Daryl Hunt, uh, Alvin Thomas, Lauren Samuel, and Angela May, and myself. So it was a
Okay.
co-ed sort of Manhattan Transfer meets Boys to Men kind of thing.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so and there was also I had a good friend named Scotty Beats who was an engineer, and he worked at a studio in the area, and he kind of saw that I had a thing. So he would take me into the studio and really teach me how to record, in the studio, which was a different type of singing.
Right.
Taught me how to lay vocals and taught me how to sort of produce vocals, and then taught me how to sort of flesh out my songs on a track.
Yeah.
Scotty taught me all of that.
Just
So,
as far
but
as multi-tracking and layering
yeah,
yourself.
yeah, and
Yeah.
layering yourself. So
Yep.
so between those two experiences is really how I sort of came to shape and be shaped, as a recording artist.
Yeah.
Um and by the time I was a junior and was sort of being recruited for grad school programs in psychology, I was like, I think I'm gonna take a break. And I told
Yeah.
my mom, I don't want to go to grad school immediately. And she
Yeah.
was like, okay, I get that. And I told my dad, and he was like,
Huh?
but I wasn't sure what exactly I was gonna do. I just knew I wasn't gonna go to grad school immediately.
Yeah.
And after I finished at Howard, I worked on Capitol Hill for a while, but I was
Oh,
still
wow.
singing within time.
Yeah.
And I auditioned for a play, and maybe I didn't hear anything like for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, probably. And then I ran into, I think In Time was auditioning for Motown Records. They had this big cattle call audition at this
Oh,
club.
wow.
So we
Yeah.
were there to audition for that. But I ran into the guy who auditioned me for the play, the director of this play. And he
Yeah.
said, hey, you're my angel. Angel was the character.
Ah.
And he said, I've been looking for you. I lost your contact or whatever. Do you want to come to California and be in this play? And I
Yeah.
was like, this guy.
Yeah.
Whatever, man. Yeah, I'll go to California. And
Yeah.
2 weeks later, a plane ticket came in the mail. And
Wow.
because yeah, this was
It
still
was
when
for real.
tickets, yeah, this is still when paper tickets were a thing.
Right.
And I flew to LA and I did this musical, but that's what got me here was to to
Wow.
to do this play. And then I fell in love with LA and was like, I gotta stay here. And I went
Yeah.
back to DC and got my belongings and drove back.
Wow.
Yeah.
And mom and dad were cool with this? Some dude sending you a plane ticket coming out to California, they were like, "Go right ahead, no problem."
I don't know what was going through their heads, but I think they trusted that they raised me to be smart enough to know
Yeah.
what I was getting into,
Right.
and to not get myself into anything that was untowardly or anything like that.
Which is what all we can do, right, as
All
parents.
you can do as parents,
Yeah.
is just let the kid leave the nest and
Yep.
and pray for the
Gotta
best,
spread their wings and let them use their inner, yeah, let
But
them
it all,
trust their instincts.
and trust their instincts. But the play was short lived. But
Okay.
but in that production, I really came out of my shell once again, even further.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um, and then once that was over, I met up with some Howard people who lived here in Los Angeles and
Okay.
began networking with them. And then they would take me around to meet other musicians. This was when a band called Polyester Players was playing at Luna
Oh, right,
Park
right, right.
every
Yeah, yeah.
Tuesday night.
Luna
And so
Park, man.
Luna Park. And so my
Love
friend
that
Gordon
place.
Campbell was the drummer.
Uh-huh.
And Gordon went to Howard, and Gordon
Yeah.
introduced me to, everybody who was anybody, in terms of music. So I
Yeah.
met uh, some producers named Sauce and Fuzzy and Roe, and they were in a group called
Ah,
Something for the People.
okay.
And they had just come off of, the success of producing a few songs on Brandy's first album. And
Okay,
they
yeah.
they were working on a new artist who was about to come out named Eric Benet,
All right, yeah.
and and so Sauce was like the main producer in the group. Sauce kind of took me under his wing, and once again, this is a producer kind of really showing me how to flesh things out, and so
Yeah.
I was able to build up my songwriters catalog because that's what I
Yeah.
wanted to do, Dan. I wanted to be a
Right.
songwriter.
Yeah.
That was my whole intention,
That was a
coming out
smart
here.
instinct, Si.
You would think, I don't know, but what happened was my songwriting demo, like the cassette or the DAT,
Yeah.
that's how long
Right.
ago it was. The
Yep.
DAT, all the publishing places that I went to, BMI and all of these places, they all thought it was like a recording artist demo because I sang all
Oh,
the songs.
yeah.
And they were like, "She should get a recording deal. She should get a deal. She should get a deal." And
Yeah.
that's not what I was going for. And I was
Yeah.
like, "No, no, no, no." And then finally, I just took a deal because I was like, "This is the only way I'm gonna get these songs out."
Yeah. Right.
And so I took a deal with Hollywood Records,
Yeah.
um, and they had a brand new sort of urban music department,
Right.
and so that situation was strange for all
How
kinds of
so?
reasons.
This is
Well,
90s, late 90s
this
or
is
so.
like, yes, this is like 98, 99.
Okay. Okay.
It was strange because the urban department at Hollywood Records,
Yeah.
how do you say this, Dan? It felt very Plessy versus Ferguson,
Okay.
like it was very
Yeah.
separate but equal kind of thing.
Gotcha.
Like the people who worked in the urban department were in a whole separate section of the Hollywood Records floor,
Mm.
and then for things that you would think the record company, like I remember the publicity person at Hollywood Records.
Yeah.
He wasn't in the urban department, he was just at Hollywood Records. But I remember
Yeah.
him telling me, we're going to source out for your bio because I don't know how to write an urban bio. Like, what
Okay.
is an urban bio?
Can't you just write a bio on me
Can't you
like you
just
do
write a
everyone else?
bio?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a very strange thing. Like they wanted urban music, but they didn't really.
Have too much experience with Black people yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And they didn't really seem keen at the time on bringing or hiring people that might have experience in that regard.
Got you. Right. And
So
how long did they start bringing on people on board to make it a little bit easier?
not while I was there. And
No,
like
yeah.
by the time I did my album, they ended up not even releasing the whole album because they were just it was almost like they what's the phrase? They want our rhythm but not our blues.
Ah, uh-huh.
you know,
Yeah.
it
Yep.
was a very sort of like they wanted me to change a lyric on one of my
Okay.
songs because they felt like it was it was really a song uh about an uprising in the community because of
Uh-huh.
a sense of injustice that the community felt, and they wanted me to change the lyric, and I was just like, this was the same lyric that you guys signed me on. That's
Right.
crazy. No,
Right.
it wasn't like it was cussing or anything. It was just this uprising, and
Right.
they didn't want the community to burn this store down. That's what happened in the verse.
Right. Right.
um so yeah, I don't know if they ever did, change that, but not while I was there. They didn't.
No,
But
okay, gotcha.
the good part about all of this, that whole experience was, they did make it so that I could work with some of my dream team producers, like on my
Oh,
dream
yeah.
list, So
Gotcha.
that's how I ended up working with Ali Shaheed Muhammad because he was
Oh,
number
yeah.
one on my list of producers I wanted to work with,
Yeah,
you
boy.
know.
Yep.
Um, uh, and that's how I worked with, well, James Poyser and I were friends, but
Okay.
I got to work with some really great people, and do
Yeah.
some great songs. And then, did a promo tour that once again pulled me out of my shell a little bit more. And
Yeah.
and even though they didn't release the album, I felt like a part of me was released, you know.
Right. You
And
figured out kind of the key to something that you wanted to do on your next
yes,
next turn at bat.
yes.
Yeah.
And I really learned that there was a thing about being on stage in the front and center. There was a thing about being amplified in that kind of way that I
Hmm.
fell in love with, to finally not be invisible,
Yeah.
and to have a platform where y'all have to listen to me because I have the mic, you know,
Right.
that kind of thing,
Power.
you
Yep.
know.
Yep.
And then by the end of whatever performance, winning the audience over, there was really something about that I fell in love with, telling stories and
Yeah.
and engaging people in the same way that, or in a similar way that Patti LaBelle performance did for me,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So I
The
got a
microphone
lot.
is powerful. I mean, there's
Yes.
a reason that, especially back in the heyday of the 60s and 70s, that the government was watching everyone from John Lennon to James Brown to Otis Redding because
Right.
they had that mic and they were saying
Yep.
stuff that hadn't been said before.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
saying it in a way that so many people could hear it,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
galvanizing that energy.
Yeah.
It's a
Yep.
powerful thing. It's a
Yeah.
really powerful thing. Yeah.
Probably the most powerful thing.
Yep.
Music is the most powerful.
Yep.
Yeah. What was it
Absolutely.
like when you were first dealing, just on a technical standpoint,
Mhm.
when you moved here and you were getting these offers from Hollywood Records? Did you already have connections to attorneys and stuff to help you look through contracts and all that
Oh,
kind of
that's a
thing?
good question. I didn't Well, I had an attorney, but it was like, I think I met this attorney through some mutual friends who also used him,
Gotcha. Yeah.
yeah. So, but I had no experience with that prior to, you know,
Signing a deal.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about songwriting and publishing and all that stuff? Who
I
who
mean,
helped you out figuring that stuff all out?
it was really I mean, it was really me sort of figuring that kind of stuff out as I went.
Yeah, sure.
And even still, it's like we're still figuring it out because every
Yeah.
time the platforms change, the technology changes,
Yeah.
the the collections change too.
Exactly, exactly.
So it's like, so this sort of, publishing and all of that stuff, publishing and performing rights
Yeah.
are constantly in flux, and I find myself
I
constantly
know.
having to keep up with keep up
Yeah.
with that stuff. Yeah.
It's nonstop. I luckily have a friend, Bill Coulter, who works for Music Reports, who
Mhm.
collects all the streaming, and he keeps me up to date. But it's like I'm really, like you've got to, first it was just your PRO, ASCAP or BMI or whoever you were
Mhm.
with. And then you're having to, I feel like I'm constantly having to take my entire songwriting catalog and upload it to some other company's site so that I get paid. Like
Right.
you really have to be on top of who's controlling what, who you're getting your
Mhm.
money from, because
Mhm.
you're right, it constantly changes. It's
Yeah.
constantly being hopefully updated and made easier, but
Yeah.
it's a lot to keep
Yeah.
track of as an artist. You
It's
want
a
to just
lot
focus
to
on your
keep.
music, and
Right.
you got all that stuff to deal with too.
Right. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
now I have my administration is going through Missing Link Publishing. Shout out to Missing
Okay.
Link.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's quite a lot. And when you read stories about, you know, a famous songwriter or not so famous songwriter or a musician who,
Yeah.
maybe died penniless, but their song was sampled and, made a lot of money for whoever sampled it, and you're just like, how could something like that happen? but the fact is, the way the business of music is constructed here, at least in
Yeah.
America, it's almost made so that the artist is at the very bottom of that totem pole, you
Yeah.
know?
It's true. It's true.
Um, so you really have to make sure that you're laying your bricks, early on, you know?
Well, yeah, and you can't, I mean, obviously there's this glorified kind of, biography of like the elegantly wasted rock star, and it's like
Mhm,
in this day and age, you just can't be that person anymore. You got to be on, in addition to making your art fantastic and
mhm.
making all that stuff happen, you got to be on top of your business too. You can't afford
Yeah.
to just be stoned all the time.
Right. Yeah, you definitely can't afford to be stoned all the time. It's,
Work hard and play hard, of course, but like,
right. Yeah, there's a
you
lot
got
to
to be
stay
on
on
top of
top
so many
of.
things. That's
Yeah,
true.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I know that a lot of people are like, but I just want to sing, or I just want to play, or I just want to produce. But, you
Yeah.
know, no, you don't. You don't just want to do any of that. You also want to make a living at it.
Right.
And part of that is making sure that you're staying on top of all of it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. When you can't eat and can't pay your bills, you're not going to be
right.
singing too much.
Right, right, right. And it's okay to say, that you don't necessarily want to be a superstar or whatever. I get all of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want to be a superstar either. Like but no matter what level of the game you want to play, it would still behoove you to make sure you know as much as
Yeah.
you can so that you get as much as you can out of it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Because there's a lot to get out of it. That's
So
for
there's a
sure.
lot to get out of it. Yeah.
No reason somebody else should be making that money besides the person who created that art. I mean,
Right, right,
people
right,
should get their cut because they're helping you do their thing, but
right.
the artist should definitely be getting the lion's share.
Exactly, exactly. And why shortchange yourself?
Exactly. You're worth it.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
awesome, creative human being.
That's right. Exactly,
It's funny
exactly.
you mentioned Luna Park though, because I know you sang with Macy, and the one track I played on with her, I had played Luna Park with Breakestra, I think,
Uh
Miles and
huh.
the group I was in with Miles and Carlos.
Uh huh.
And at like 2 a.m, I get a call from Macy, Dan, come over. Can you come over to the studio and play? I was like, okay, it's 2 a.m, but okay. So I came by, and I played on one song on her first record, and
Oh,
it was where I met Dave Wilder and
oh yeah,
everybody.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
What
Arik, and
song was it?
it's called Rather Hazy,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
which was like, I didn't know it even made the record. Dave told me like 10 years later, because it was like, it
Wow.
wasn't on the American version of the record. It was only on the
Wow.
Brazilian and English and stuff. So I could have
Right.
gotten like a gold, whatever, I don't know how many records she
Yeah.
sold that first record, a lot, but I didn't even
Yeah.
know it had made it until, like 10 years later.
Wow.
But it's a
Wow.
really pretty song.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's
And it
so
was
cool.
all at Luna Park, RIP Luna Park.
R.I.P.
That was,
Luna Park.
that was a
That
great
was an
spot.
era.
It sure was. Yeah,
Yeah.
boy.
Luna Park
Well,
and Temple Bar was an era too, man. I
oh
remember
man.
seeing Breakestra a couple of times.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh
Oh,
yeah, I
crazy.
loved Breakestra.
Oh man, me too. It was
Yeah.
fun. I did that for like 8 years and had a blast, man. We went to
Yeah, that was a
Japan and Europe,
killing
and
band.
oh, thanks. Thanks. It was super fun. We just had our first thing we ever did just came out. Somebody finally re-released it on vinyl. So that was exciting. But
Wow, that's
I
cool.
know. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah.
Anyway, enough about me. So let's if we can we get back to Hollywood? And I know, like so many of us, label heads change at labels, and artists get dropped. And
Mhm.
that's just a common thing with so many. You get
Right.
dropped, you go on to move on and learn things from that and move on to other
Yeah.
scenarios. But what is it like? What was that situation like for you? What led to it, and how did you
Yeah.
overcome it? And what was your next
So,
step?
yeah, that's a good question. So, I, Hollywood and I parted ways probably in 2001,
Yeah,
and because it was clear they weren't going to release the album. They
yeah,
had two different versions of this album that I had done.
yeah,
Um, and they'd gone through a new president, and I was just like, oh, this is never going to happen. Just let me go, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and at the time, I was I was lucky because my all of my eggs weren't in the recording artist basket.
Yeah.
Um, they had released a single on me, Gladly, was the name of it. But I was still singing backup for different people and doing a lot of work on at that point I had started doing some TV work, like
Yeah.
on this show called Ally McBeal.
Right. I saw
Um,
you were on that. That's crazy.
yeah, yeah, it's crazy.
That's
And
cool.
and a lot of stuff with Ricky Minor.
Yeah.
And by that point I had done Whitney Houston, and I think I was
Dang.
going out with Chaka Khan every now and then, and so I was busy.
Yeah.
Um, so even though that breakup probably like I was probably down for a little bit, but
Yeah.
I didn't have I didn't have the stresses that other recording artists might have,
Yeah.
because I was working,
You were busy. Yeah.
I was
Not too much
busy.
time to be down about it.
Right, not too much time to be down about it, and all my bills were paid, you know?
Right.
Um, so maybe after a few months of just sort of trying to figure it out,
Yeah.
um, I was like, I was doing these shows here in town
Yeah.
called Bitchcraft,
I read
and
about this. Yeah. Tell me about that in Lamert Park, right?
yeah, in Lamert Park. So Bitchcraft started because nobody in town would really book me as far as clubs went, because
Hmm.
they didn't really understand what I was doing.
Okay.
You got to think back to 2001. R&B was still like sort of you're either like Ashanti or you're not.
Hmm. Yeah.
It was very sort of, or and if I wasn't rapping, so
Yeah.
there weren't really a lot of spaces for a girl like me to play.
Yeah.
And so I was like, maybe I should just start a venue, you know, and
Yeah.
then I can play it. So
Yeah.
Bitchcraft was the venue, and I did it out of a coffee house called Lucy Florence Coffee House,
Okay.
and I set it up so that I could have other women perform,
Yeah.
and then I would perform at the end. So it wasn't
Yeah.
just about me, it was a showcase for women, and it wasn't just singers. It was like I had comedians, I had dancers, I had dramatic interpretations from actors, and
Yeah.
then my friend DJ Spark, she would spin between acts, and then I
Oh,
would
yeah.
come out and do my performance, and it was really cool. Um, because it gave a lot of us, a place to shine, whereas we wouldn't have had those places, that
Yeah.
place.
Well, lesson to our listeners here, if you're not getting the work you want, create the work you want.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Create the venue. And so we
Create
outgrew
the
the
venue.
coffee house, and we had to move across the way into this little theater space that was in the same complex in Lamert
Okay.
Park. And
Yeah.
and so I was doing all of this, and I didn't have an album to sell. And people after the shows would always be like, "Where's the CD? Where's the CD?" And I was like,
Yeah.
"Why don't I have a CD?" So I put like 5 songs together that I had that weren't on the album that I had just done for this record company that was never going to come out, because I
Yeah.
couldn't use that stuff. So
Right.
I was like, I put these 5 songs and went over to disc makers in Burbank and was like,
Yeah.
"How much would it cost for me to make a CD?"
Yeah.
And so I just did that, printed up 1,000 of them and sold them at the shows. But when they started selling, that's when I realized, like, oh, I could do this as an artist by myself.
Right.
And this was before independent independent music was even associated with R&B. Anytime you heard
Mm.
independent, it was usually associated with rock, indie rock. But nobody ever
Yeah.
really talked about indie soul. But
Yeah.
that's what this was becoming,
Yeah. Yeah.
was a foray into uh indie soul that hadn't really been done out here yet, you
Sure.
know.
Sure. Yeah.
And I
And
didn't
indie
know it
hip
at the
hop too. Too Short and all those people.
Right,
A lot of
right,
people were just making their own stuff. DJ Quick and all kinds of people were just
right.
selling stuff out of their
Or
car.
out of their cars, right?
Yeah.
But you didn't really hear about too many, R&B or soul or whatever you
Right.
want to call us doing
Yep.
that.
Yep.
And at the time, there was like there were a couple, like there was Medusa,
Yep.
out here doing her thing.
Love her. Yeah.
Kim Hill was doing it.
Oh yeah, Kim.
Yeah. So there were a couple of us kind of on that thing. And now that I look back at it, we were sort of pioneering that scene,
Yeah.
um, for indie soul here in LA. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of interesting to see where it is now.
Yeah.
Um, but that's what we were doing. And so that's how I got into just making my own records and selling
Yeah.
them myself.
And where'd you record these records? How'd you go about doing that?
I recorded at a little studio in, I guess it was North Hollywood, Burbank, kind of right up there on the border, called Barry Paul Recording. So Barry Paul was this fantastic engineer from the UK.
Yeah.
You're very sort of quintessential, old white guy, rock and roll, cigarette, always had a cigarette and a beer, but he
Right.
could mix and record and mix the hell out of anything. And so
Oh yeah.
he had a live room set up, and we could we could record drums. He was so good at miking drums and just getting that big warm sound that you want from live instrumentation. But he was also very good at recording if I just brought in a track,
Yeah.
um, because he was just really good at everything.
Right.
So Barry did most of my recording for up until my album Conflict. So that's a lot of my stuff. Yeah, like from the Cyberspace Social.
Yeah.
Yeah, Barry did that. And then I moved over to Grant Nicholas, who was also based out of North Hollywood, Burbank, I guess.
Uh-huh.
And Grant Nicholas, actually, Grant was originally in Winnetka up at
Okay.
up at the studio that used to belong to Captain and Tennille.
Oh yeah.
I
Okay.
remember because it was shaped like a boat.
Oh really? Classic.
The
The
building
Dragon,
looked
bro.
like a boat.
You know Captain's real last name is Dragon? Did you know
Really?
that?
I
Yeah,
didn't know that.
it's like him and he had two brothers, and their dad was a film composer. And, I think his name was Dennis Dragon, or maybe that's one of the boys. But
Dragon.
the dad was a film composer. They grew up in Malibu,
Oh,
and the
wow.
three boys all were the Dragon family.
The Dragon family.
And the guy who turned into the captain came
Uh-huh.
from this super musical family of
That's
the
so
Dragon
wild.
brothers or whatever.
I didn't
Yeah.
know that.
Anyway,
But
yeah. Side
yeah,
story.
so Grant Nicholas, yeah, no. Grant Nicholas became my engineer probably from about 2008 on to now. Um,
Okay.
and he was in Winnetka and then moved down to Burbank. Um,
Ah,
and and now he's in Baltimore, which is a whole other weird thing because now I've had to learn how to record myself and then send him everything and
yeah.
you know and I'm not the girl who likes to record herself. Like I'm not that artist at all.
Well, it's tough to do both things at the same time, produce yourself and sing at
hmm
the same time,
It's really tough. It's really tough for me to split my brain as I'm working,
Sure.
and that's what it requires.
Yeah.
But the fact that my engineer moved back to Baltimore and the pandemic kind of forced me to get used to this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I actually set up my mic right here in my bedroom because I have
Yeah.
all these blankets and stuff around and curtains and dampens the
Nice.
sound pretty well. And I have a really good mic.
Yeah.
And it's a very simple setup, for recording. But yeah, if you hear anything from me from 2021 on, it's probably recorded here in my bedroom. The
Oh
2020
man.
stuff, the stuff that I did for you, I did up in my attic.
Oh, okay. It sounded good too. Yeah, I
Cool.
still get compliments on that single. People
Oh,
love you on
good.
that.
I'm glad.
Boy.
That
Yeah, oh
was
man.
fun. But that was
So good.
probably my first, damn, that was the first time I really recorded myself.
Okay.
And
Well done.
thank you. I was so nervous. I
Yeah.
was so nervous because because first of all, the song is so dope. I just wanted to make sure I sent you something good, you know.
Oh, you did.
Uh,
And, I mean, it's, people talk about, obviously all of us who have studios have nice mics and stuff, but it's a testament to the performance and how
ah,
beautifully you sang on that.
thank you.
I think you probably could have sung on an SM57 and it would have sounded good,
Oh,
It
thank you.
sounded great. You nailed that song.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
But yeah, I think that that whole thing, this whole sort of pandemic has really been a test of just being able to sort of roll with the punches in that
Right.
regard, you know.
Right.
So as comfortable as I might have been, with my, usual going to the studio, recording, da da da, doing that, I
Yeah.
had to change and be okay with that. And it took a second to get used to it, but you know, that flexibility is required.
Yeah, especially in this day and age. But, that is I mean, I've worked with a lot of singers, producing a lot of singers
Hmm.
and then singing myself, trying to produce myself singing. It's so
Hmm.
difficult. Like as a singer, you want to just be able to let go. Somebody else can do the editing and be like, hey, you didn't quite hit that one note. Go up
Right.
and do that again. And to
Right.
do both of those jobs at the same time it's something we should talk about because it's an important
Yeah.
it's a hard thing to get used to doing,
It's
producing
a
yourself
hard
as a
thing to get
vocalist.
it's a hard thing to get used to doing. Um, like I've always been cool, like producing my own vocal, but the
Mm,
recording and producing part,
yeah,
for some reason, the fact that I have to hit the record button changes everything for me in my brain,
yeah, yeah,
because then I have to think about more than my performance, it seems. I don't even know why that line is there, but for some reason, there's an invisible line that changes the way I have to do things. I think it's because physically
yeah,
I have to actually move to this space and do that, and then walk back over to the mic,
yeah, right.
and so I have to kind of
Let me turn it
come out of my head for a second, and and then I end up doing that thing that sometimes we do, which is let me do it again. Let me do it again. Let me do it again.
right,
you
right.
know, uh,
Absolutely.
ad nauseum. So
Well, yeah, and us engineers are always looking at VU meters and making sure nothing's peaking. And, it's a lot to
right,
think about your brain to shift into those. You got to like split your brain in half almost.
right, and yeah, and then as I'm recording, as I'm actually singing, I can't really look and see, but I'm thinking
Sure,
about it. I'm thinking
sure.
about it, and I think that's part of that invisible line I was just talking about. Is like gauging, trying to gauge, levels and stuff while I'm singing, and
Yeah,
going back and taking a look at it to see if it looks like it's peaking or not, and it's
yeah,
all of that kind of
yep,
stuff. Um,
absolutely.
but and then still trying to make the space intimate and conducive to bringing out the best performance I can give. You
Right,
know,
right.
um, it's such a weird thing. And then, you know, I don't know, I don't have like a studio setup. So I don't have like monitors where I can listen back. I'm just in my
Okay,
headphones. So everything is in my
gotcha.
head, you know.
Right.
It's
Right.
you know,
All inclusive.
it's all inclusive until,
Oh, man.
until I get in a car or something. Um, but it's just one of those things, like, that's just what it is right now. I just had to sort of get used to that,
Yeah.
and 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 I've gotten way, way better.
Yeah. Practice makes perfect. I think all of us have learned so many lessons that we didn't know we'd be learning during this
Right,
pandemic,
right.
in many different ways. And that's
In
one
a
of them.
lot of different ways, yeah. And I'm really happy that I mean, I'm not happy that the pandemic happened, but I am happy that I got this opportunity to sit still long enough to do things like this, like to
Yeah.
do your project, to work with friends of mine like Rachel Eckroth,
Okay.
people that I've been wanting to work with, but I was literally always in the air.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's been nice to be grounded in this
Right.
way,
Right.
and have time to stretch out, you know,
Yeah.
stretch
Yeah.
out artistically and stretch out, physically.
Right. And collaboratively, it's like
Hmm.
I don't know about you, but this pandemic has definitely opened me up to just obviously with the advent of computer recording. It's like we can just collaborate with people and social media, to be fair, as well.
Right,
You
right,
can reach out to people you didn't think you'd have access to and just,
right.
hey, you want to try something? And
Hmm.
cool stuff happens that way, you
And
know?
cool stuff happens that way. And it's been a breath of fresh air for me, to be able to just do things that I didn't even know would be something I would be interested in doing.
Right. Right.
Um, I've been working a lot with my good friend Jared Faber, who
Okay.
does a lot of music and scoring for like animation and TV. So
Yeah.
he does um, Teen Titans, that kind of thing on
Yeah.
Cartoon
All
Network.
right. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and so that's like a fun part of my voice that I get to use, that I don't get to do that often.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because I saw you did the voice of, was it Aisha on a
Yeah, on
cartoon
a
show?
video game.
And
Uh
what is that like? I have one other friend who does voiceovers, my friend Alex, and
right.
how is that different? Like, how did you first fall into that, and how is doing voiceover and voiceover acting with your voice
Hmm.
different from singing? And
Singing.
how'd you get into it?
So at the time I was with an agent, commercial agent, called Cunningham Escott DePini, CED or CESD, and I was represented them by them. I was represented by them for commercial acting and voiceover act.
Okay.
So I got an audition for this video game called Saints
Yeah.
Row,
Right.
and Saints Row, the character's name was Aisha, like you said.
Uh-huh.
Saints Row, the I guess the plot of the game. I've never played the game,
I
but
don't play video
it,
games
okay.
either.
But it's like Saints Row was like a record label, I think, or
Oh,
kind of like Death Row, and
okay.
but there was a underworld crime element happening, with
Okay.
that kind of thing. And so there
Yeah.
are all these characters, but Aisha was signed to the label. And, so when I auditioned, I got the part, but I knew that my character was a recording artist. So I just mentioned in the session when I went to do the session,
Yeah.
and the session was me just reading Aisha's lines. Um, and when you do these, it's just you. Like there were no other actors around, so
Yeah.
I'm saying my lines out of context. I'm not even able to react in real time to
Right,
anybody
right.
else.
Nothing to respond to.
Right. So what you do is you have your lines and you say each line probably two or three times in different ways.
Okay.
So if the line was "fuck you, Johnny,"
Yeah.
you're like, "Fuck you, Johnny. Fuck
Yeah.
you, Johnny. Fuck
Yeah.
you, Johnny." And you just do all three in a row, and
Right.
then you go to the next line.
Right. 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 Right.
um,
And then
so
they edit it and produce it later.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
after the session was over, and this session was, I had all these lines, and then I had to do all these noises, like fighting noises or grunts or whatever, like because there's action. So there's a
Hmm.
lot of that.
Yeah.
After the session was over, I mentioned to the creator of the game who was there,
Yeah.
like, "Hey, I see that Aisha's a recording artist. I'm a recording artist in real life. Can I do some music for this game?" And he was like, "Really?" You know,
Nice.
so he said, I'll be in touch. So they called my agent,
Yeah.
and I guess they had a bunch of questions for my agent, regarding this. So she calls me and she said, "Hey, they want to know if you can, write and produce songs for the game." And I was like, "Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I can." And she said, "Okay, they want to know if you can write a song based on a song title that they give you." And I said,
Mm.
"Yes, yes, just tell them yes. Tell them I can do
Yeah.
whatever."
Yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted the gig.
Sure.
So she called me back, and they worked out the terms, and she said, "Okay, Sai, I have three song titles for you to write."
Uh-oh.
Right. And I was like, "Okay, okay, I'm ready." And I got a pen. She was like, "Okay, the first song title is Bounce Like My Check." I said, okay, bounce
That's a
like my
great
checks.
title.
Right, right. And I'm like, yeah,
That's a good title.
that sounds like fun. Bounce like
Yeah.
my checks. All right. And my wheels are turning. Then she said, okay, the next song title is Leave the Hoe. Oh, okay. leave, leave the hoe.
Uh-huh.
All right. And then she said, all right, this last title, okay, it's whew, don't fuck me, don't fuck me like I'm your wife.
Oh. You're like, "Shit, what did I get myself into?"
Right. But Dan, I'll tell you what, I had so much fun writing these songs for this
I bet, yeah.
character. And I had so much fun writing that last title that I ended up keeping it and writing a whole new song with that title,
Right.
because the
Oh.
first one that I did came out so good that I just wanted it for myself. And I wrote an entirely different one and
Oh,
produced
that's awesome.
an entirely different track for the game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such a phenomenon. I've heard that story from a lot of people where you get a gig to do something and you write something and you're like, "I don't know if I can give this away. I might
Right.
need to do another draft and keep this for me."
That's exactly what happened.
Oh, that's cool. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
And to
Oh,
this
how
day,
cool.
that was a long time ago, but to this day, if you go on YouTube and look up Aisha bounce like my checks or Aisha leave the hoe, or Aisha like I'm your wife.
Yeah.
I mean, the comments are so hilarious because people who played the game really loved those songs,
Oh, that's great.
and they were really angry that Aisha got killed off. So, you
Oh,
know, I know if you're
I
watching Saints Row people, bring Aisha back.
you know what I'm gonna be doing this weekend? I'm gonna be looking that up. That's great.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about all of your singing gigs because you've gotten so many with so many legendary singers. And for all our budding background singers out there, or just singers in
Mhm,
general, I mean, you've
mhm.
sung with Chaka Khan, you've sung with Whitney Houston, you sang with Macy Gray, of course,
Yeah.
and I just think like, what? How do you go about getting those gigs and those auditions, and what do you do personally to prepare for auditions like that when you know, okay, Whitney Houston wants me to come possibly be a background singer, her management does? How do you
Mm.
go into those situations and prepare yourself?
Um, well, the Whitney Houston thing, the way it happened wasn't even something I was preparing for. I was just picking
Okay.
up a good friend from her audition.
Oh, okay.
And when I picked her up, her name is Charlotte Gibson. When I picked
Hmm.
Charlotte up, she introduced me to Ricky Minor and was like, "Ricky, this is my good friend. You should hear her sing. She's really
Yeah.
good." And Ricky was
Yeah.
like, "Okay, let's hear you right now." And the mics were still set up, and and he had the boombox still there on the floor, and it was like, "Okay, let's do I'm Every Woman." He pressed play, and and the three of us, me, Ricky, and Charlotte, stood at the
Yeah.
mics and sang the chorus, and he had me on the top, and that's what happened, and then he
Yeah.
was like, okay,
Yeah.
that's pretty good. Let's switch parts. So you
Yeah.
take the middle, and had me there, and then okay, let's do the bridge,
Right.
bam. And
Right.
so he said, okay, you're pretty good. If I ever need a soprano, I'll give you a call. And
That was
that's how
it.
I got that gig. Yeah, like
Right. Right.
2 or 3 months later, he called and said, hey, how would you like to do Constitution Hall with Whitney Houston live on HBO? And I
Dang.
was like, "What?"
Yes, please.
Yes, please, exactly. Um, but, how to prepare, sometimes the audition will give you very specific preparation, they'll tell you what
Mm,
songs to learn. Sometimes, you should just come sort of knowing the main body of work, for these artists that you might be auditioning for. You should
right.
you should sing. I think it would be really wise to get with other singers as a section
Right.
and practice together, practice singing backups together and switch parts within your section so that all three of you,
Right.
or 3 or 4 of you, know all the parts,
Right.
like I think
Right.
that would be a wise thing to do. um some artists that I have toured with, uh, I've sort of created the role in that situation. Like Michelle and Cello, didn't really have parts for me. She just
Yeah.
wanted me to do what I do,
Mm.
and I got and she had it was Michelle, Kenny Allen was playing guitar and singing at the time. So I just listened to what they were doing together, the two of them, and I
Yeah.
kind of got in where I fit in. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And
Sure.
that was just sort of a thing that I'm able to do. It was sort of the same way with Sheila E. Like
Mm.
I was the only designated singer at the time, so I just sort of created the role. You know, uh,
Yeah.
created the part, so to speak. Uh, and I think it I don't know how to teach people to do that.
No, of
I
course, but it seems, I mean, it's obviously an intuitive thing because you produce as
Mhm.
well. Does this track need something or does it not?
Right.
Like when to lay
Exactly.
out and when not, when not to, when it needs something versus when it doesn't.
Right, exactly. That's the main thing is you have to remember that you are a in this particular situation, your role is a supporting vocalist. So
Yeah.
where does your artist need support? You
Right.
know,
Right.
that's the question to answer,
Yeah.
and that's the role to fill. Where
Yeah.
does where does the artist need support? Where does the song need support? Or where does a
Sure.
lyric need support? And
Yeah.
that's
Where
where
does it need
you
a push? Where does it
right.
need, yeah,
hmm
a transition?
Right.
Yeah.
Where does doubling make sense? Where does harmony make sense? Where does
Sure.
an ad lib make sense?
Right.
Like you don't have to fill in every space, you
Yeah.
know.
Exactly. Well, it goes back to what we first started talking about when you were talking about singing in choir is being team players. And it's
Yeah.
like the more you can make that song or that performance shine as a whole,
Mhm.
the more chances you're going to have getting more gigs because
Right.
you made that ensemble sound good with your contribution.
Right. Right. And that's the goal. That's the goal.
Right.
To make the
That's that.
ensemble, you know, be as good as possible and to make the show one of the most memorable experiences that audience has ever seen. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, my last question for you today is just one, just because I've been married 20 years now, but I know you
Wow,
married your husband,
congratulations.
Sean, along
Yes.
in 2010, I think I
Yes,
read.
that's right.
And it's just so interesting to me because it takes a rare person to be married to one of us creative types.
Say that again,
And
brother.
they have a lot of patience, and
Yeah.
we're so grateful for them. And I
Yes.
just was curious what Sean does. How does married life navigate the constant fluctuation of activity and the
Mhm.
ups and downs of getting calls and then not getting calls,
Right.
feast and famine?
Right.
How do you plan getaways versus last minute paying gigs and
Mhm.
all that stuff? That's just a I thought an interesting
Yeah.
question.
I'm lucky because Sean, my husband, is also an artist. He's an actor and a
Mm.
filmmaker and a
Hmm.
director. So that's his world, acting, film, TV. And he
Gotcha.
happens to play piano. He's a fantastic classical pianist.
Okay.
So he really gets it. I
Yeah.
don't really have to explain much to him in regards to what it is that we do and the kind of needs that I might have, as
Sure.
as his partner. Like we both kind of intuitively know when we need space, you
Yeah.
know, and during the pandemic, we've been able to really have cool conversations and like fall into a pattern of waking up and we both have our coffee or whatever and we'll be like, "What are you doing today?" Or, "I need to record, da da da." "Okay, well, I need to practice piano." And it's like, "Okay, we can figure this out, da 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 da."
Yeah.
But over the years, we've worked together a lot on things together because, like I said, he's a director. So he's
Mm.
directed, like, I don't know, 7 of my music videos,
Oh,
something like
wow.
that.
Okay.
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
like he directed The Art of You, which we filmed in Italy. You know,
Okay. Yeah.
um, he shot uh, Nights Feel Like Getting Down, which we shot partially at the El Rey and then partially here in the house, green
Mm.
screen.
Yeah.
He's done so many music videos with me, and that's
Oh,
been
that's awesome.
delightful. We shot Camelot in Tanzania 2 years ago. Um,
Wow.
yeah, so we have a lot of experience actually working together,
Yeah.
which has been really nice.
Oh, I bet.
During
That's
the
amazing.
pandemic, he had an idea to do a variety show
Hmm.
live on Facebook.
Okay.
Uh, so, old school variety show, like Sonny and Cher, or
Uh-huh.
so he wrote these skits, and I came up with some music, and we did about 6 episodes.
Oh, no way. You got to send me a link. I want to watch
Yeah, I
that.
will, I
That's
will, I
great.
will. And we did them live on Facebook, but he's actually repackaged them and put them all on YouTube, so I can actually send you the link.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, I'd love to watch it. That's great.
Yeah, they're silly and fun, but we have a great time working together. Um, but even if he weren't an artist, I don't know. I think we have a great time together because he is an artist also. Because like you said,
Yeah.
it takes a special kind of person to be able to marry and partner up with us.
You. Yep.
It really does. So I'm just lucky to have found a partnership in somebody who also does what we do, you
Oh,
know.
that's beautiful.
Yeah. So we'll be 11 years next month.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, congrats.
Yeah.
Congratulations to you too. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well,
And I gotta
that's like,
say,
oh, go ahead.
oh no, I was gonna say I gotta say dogs make everything better. We have a dog, and
Yes.
and our dog has really, we got him 8 years ago almost, and so our
Oh,
doggy has really made a way for both of us to connect in a different way too. Yeah,
absolutely. Oh my
yeah.
gosh. I'm a huge dog person too. I have our little lab, June, who is just
Oh,
my little angel. I love her. She's so
oh,
sweet. And yeah, they're the best
yeah,
dogs.
they're the best. They're the best.
Well, you got a beautiful, crew around you. And I'm just so grateful to have talked to you today. Thanks so much for making time for me. And
Oh,
I just can't wait for our listeners to hear all these great stories. And
thanks
thanks
so
for
much.
sharing everything with me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a good time talking about all this stuff.
All right. Hope you enjoyed this episode of The Conduit. The Conduit is brought to you by Crewest Studio and DanUbeProductions.com. Many thanks to the folks at Squadcast, Polymash, Captivate, We Edit Podcasts, Universal Audio, Audio Technica, Shure, and Avid. Extra special thanks to my brothers from Other Mothers, Scott Power, Bill Coulter, and Alex Desert. And last but not least, go check out Soul Picnic, my hand-picked music playlists on notrealart.com. Until next time, this is Dan Ubik, signing off.